Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Monday, August the 13th, and grains were sharply lower on Friday with that bearish USDA crop report there that come out, and still not any help for the feeder cattle market. You would have thought that your feeders, especially out fronts, maybe the October would have been up the limit, it was up like 27 cents. Just can't get anything behind that. Your fat cattle board and your feeder cattle board were both sharply lower as a whole last week. Your fat cattle market was $3 lower. We got a little bit of continued support on our box beef cutout values, but cash feeders were higher last week, but they got progressively higher through the week, especially where your farmer feeders were involved, because they got very aggressive where they went, and they did travel. We saw them traveling quite a ways from home looking for yearling feeder steers, and the numbers of those, the availability continues to dry up, and more of the offerings are going to be calves as we get closer to fall. But your cash feeders were quite a bit higher last week around in the sales, and I would still think with help from that sharply lower grains that we should be looking for a lot of support going into your early Monday high volume feeder cattle auctions. But let's look at the board for last week. October live cattle ended the week at 109 1/4, down 275 for the week. Your August feeders spot market ended at 108 1/4, and it was going to be impossible to hold that 114 market that we enjoyed the previous week. October feeder cattle ended the week at 149.47, down $3.55 for the week. August spot feeders ended at 149.90, and that is still on the average about what your 800-pound market is. Your index levels are sitting about there, right around 150 either side of it, and bouncing right in there, even though some of these featured sales, especially in the Midwest and Northern Plains, where we're getting a lot of farmer feeders coming in there, and it's supporting the market there. But you get further from there, and the bigger drives of 8-weight cattle are still right around that 150, and you've got to remember those index levels are on a 7-day moving average, so wasn't enough of those high sales late in the week to push them over. But if we continue to sell them higher, we're going to get these cash feeders up into the 150s pretty deep on the average. But your fat cattle through Thursday of last week, mind you, they had already sold 67,200 head and hadn't sold the bulk of sales, hadn't established the market yet. Then Friday, your Southern Plains sold, your Kansas, your Texas, and Colorado, and then some more cleanup sales in the Northern Plains. But late in the week on Friday, your established market was 111. That's $3 lower than the previous week. Box beef cutout values, your average trade for last week on choice cuts 205.91, up 165 from the average of the trades the previous week. Select cuts average last week, the average trade was 198.31, up 68 cents in comparison from the previous week. But that USDA crop report come out late last week. Your yield estimates were raised a lot more than anybody had thought. They are now expecting your corn yield to be on the average 178.5 bushels to the acre. That's going to be an all-time record, 4.4 bushels to the acre, higher than the estimates from July. And we know that there's areas in the Corn Belt and all through the Midwest that are super dry, but they have just gotten this corn where it's so tough through all this technology and hybrid seeds and seed breeding, and they just every year they make it where you can grow more bushels to the acre, and they never make it where you can have less acres to the cow. And that's a good thing actually for your cattle producers. It keeps your cattle prices up. But I tell you what, they make this corn so much easier to grow than it used to be, and you know, it's Roundup ready, it's drought proof, and it keeps the pressure on your corn prices. And maybe it's some time for some guys, even though that's what they've always grown. They've got a corn drill and they've got you know, a corn head. Maybe they should start diversifying into something else, because it just looks like for the distant future, corn prices are going to stay cheap. That's good for your feeder cattle prices, not so good for your row croppers. Your bean yield estimates, they raised those also up to 51.6 bushels to the acre on the average. That was 3.1 bushels to the acre higher than the estimates from the previous month. So really looking at an outstanding crop this year. All that stuff from that report sent your corn down 11.5 cents on Friday on the Chicago Board of Trade. Your beans down 42.25 cents. You look now, if you go out, your new crop corn is sitting at 371 and 3/4, and your beans at 861 and 3/4. Your cash Omaha corn price is $3.30, and you get to the country points, especially when we get into harvest, it's going to be a lot cheaper than that. Cash feeders, feeder steers $2 to $5 higher. Feeder heifers steady to $3 higher. That's just mostly because those farmer feeders are not nearly as aggressive on heifers. Sure, some of them feed them, but they would rather have the steers. They can put more corn away there. They can cheapen those steers up by making them weigh 1,700 pounds, and it helps them get rid of that corn and add value to it. So they get a lot more aggressive on the steers than the heifers. Look at some of these outstanding sales in Nebraska there, right in the hotbed of your farmer feeder demand. I know it may not be your commercial market, but this report is all about your farmer feeders on this particular one anyway. But Burwell, Nebraska had the barbecue sale on Friday. A lot of outstanding consignments there, including the Syntex steers. 220 head of steers weighed 880 pounds at 157. Erickson, Nebraska on Saturday. This is after we saw that corn drop big on Friday. Erickson had 2,100 head there. They had a lot more 9-weight steers than they did anything else. If you look at the average on those, there were 736 head of 9-weight steers at Erickson. They averaged 962 pounds with an weighted average price of $147.87 on that 962 pound average there. And then look at this quote on Cattle Market Central. Crawford, Nebraska, 120 head string of 942 pound steers bring $150.25. That's your feeder flash for Monday.